Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Now, this week our topic might seem a little bit weird. So we're going to be talking about raising cattle, specifically the feed used to raise cattle, and some new scientific developments that suggest using red algae in cattle feed can make cattle rearing a bit more environmentally friendly. So let's get into this. So what's the big idea of this whole cattle and red algae thing? Well, so we know that cattle produce large quantities of methane, which is a large contributing pollutant to climate change. Methane is a greenhouse gas, and while usually when we talk about greenhouse gases, we're talking about carbon dioxide, the actual carbon footprint of the agriculture industry is fairly neutral because of the plants grown. The carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere is pretty much the same as the carbon put into the atmosphere. So the main pollutant from the agricultural industry is methane. And a lot of the methane that's produced comes from cattle, and to a lesser extent other livestock as well, but cattle are the heavy hitters in this whole methane production world. So there are some recent studies that are very exciting, and anyone who's watched any of my videos probably knows that I'm a bit of an eco nerd and a bit of a science nerd, so bear with me here if I get a little too enthusiastic. So these studies actually found that adding red algae, specifically Asparagopsis taxiformis, which we should be able to see here in a lovely photo somewhere around my face, to the diet of cattle, so this red algae, the specific species, if it's added to cattle diets, the methane emissions will actually be reduced by about 80%. So this methane produced by cattle basically comes out in the gas that they emit from either their mouth or their rear ends, so cow burps and cow farts. This red algae reduces that by about 80% or more than 80%. I found different numbers in the different articles I have linked down below, but it's still a big deal. 80% is a lot, and since methane is the main greenhouse gas that is net produced by the agriculture industry, it's a big deal. If it can be reduced, it's exciting. And another big idea here, because one of the main things that would be concerning is adding red algae to the diet of a cow going to impact milk production or the taste of their meat, since that is the main things cows are raised for in the agricultural industry are going to be milk and meat. And the good news is there were no negative impacts found on milk production, and in a taste test there was no difference between a cow that was fed the red algae diet versus a cow fed a more conventional, commonly used diet. So basically, scientists are looking towards options to start trying to add red algae to the diets of cattle large scale. But there are some challenges that we do need to talk about here, and these challenges are really emphasized in the Wired.com article that I have linked down below. And this article is very cynical. So one of the big challenges is that a large portion of the cattle for the agriculture industry are raised on pasture. So they're fed a lot of grass, and getting the algae into the diet of pasture-raised cattle is going to be very tricky because for a large portion of the year, they're not fed a supplementary diet for the most part. And cattle in general, when offered a supplementary diet versus a grass diet, they're probably going to go graze, especially since there's some evidence suggesting that the red algae cattle feed tastes different to them, and if they have the option to not eat it, they're probably gonna not eat it. However, if you look at these large feedlots that don't really have grass or anything, it's more viable to use it there since that would be their feed option. But those large feedlots and things have other problems that go on with them that we're not going to get into here. This is not an ethics discussion in this video. We're talking about cool science. So the keyboard warriors that are going to remind me that factory farming is a terrible practice, please stop typing. Please backspace here. I know that. That's not what this video is about. This video is about how red algae can make cows fart less. So another problem is that actually growing the amount of algae to feed the amount of cattle, if we solve the problem of getting the red algae into the diet of a pasture-raised cow, we then need to be able to grow the algae to be able to produce the cattle feed to feed to the cows. And that actually might be difficult. Now, yeah, algae like this can be propagated fairly easily in a captive environment. So if we think back to the picture, we know that the algae in question here is more of a seaweed and not the stuff that you scrape off the side of your swimming pool. So it kind of grows more like a plant. But there's still the question of you need the space to do it, you need the manpower to do it, and that's a big question mark that would need to be answered as well. So that cynicalwired.com article really noted and emphasized the difficulty of problem number one, which is getting the algae into the diets of those pasture-raised cattle. And they suggested that even if we succeed, the gut microbes are just going to adjust to the new diet and we'll be back at methane emissions square one, so why even bother? Well, I've also linked an article from UC Davis that directly contradicts this point. And it actually cites some research that has done some work on if this is a long-term solution. And what they found and the evidence that they have is that the emission reduction is actually long-term. It's not just a first few months or whatever thing. It seems to be this red algae in the cattle diet will actually be a sustainable long-term reduction in those methane emissions. So if you do read that Wired.com article, which I do have linked down below because I think that it is important to still link things that may or may not support what you say, because it is important to note that you are addressing opposing viewpoints and not getting stuck in an echo chamber. Read that article with a bit of a grain of salt. I think that it might be older than the UC Davis article, but I would have to double check, and I didn't write that in my notes here. So, whoops. But anyway, the most current evidence suggests that it will be a long-term solution, which is exciting because this methane production is one of the worst parts environmentally of the agriculture industry as far as emissions go. There are many, many other terrible practices in the agriculture industry that we could get into that we're not going to in this video because not relevant to this discussion. But I have one more point here that I don't think I saw in the articles that I read in the challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges that they're going to have is actually convincing the ranchers to try something new with their cattle feed. In general, ranchers aren't too open to changes like that. They're not too open to being told that they're doing something wrong. So that I think may be the most difficult hurdle to actually get over. Now, I have mentioned in some of my wolf videos that there has been work done with ranchers and non-lethal ways to deal with wolves and coexist. But to do that, my point here, this is relevant, I promise, is that they had to get a member of the local community to act as their liaison. And I think that if this is going to be a viable thing, members of local communities are gonna have to act as a liaison between the scientists and the ranchers, because now this is not every rancher, everybody is different, but in general, these small communities where cattle ranchers and cattle ranching is a big part of the economy, the owner of the ranch tends to have been doing things the same way for many generations, and something like this coming at them from a scientist or a university may be kind of met with hostility. So that's a big hurdle, and I think one of the answers to that hurdle would be working with the local community. So to kind of wrap things up here, the red algae thing is very exciting, and I do hope that you go read the articles I have linked down below because they are fascinating. Yeah, there are challenges that need to be addressed, but every single scientific development and every single thing is going to have challenges that need to be addressed. I don't think that we need to be as cynical as the Wired article, and I have my own assumptions about the bias of the person that wrote that article that I'm not going to share here because it's not important, and again, it's just my own assumptions. But I do hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you. Consider leaving me a lovely little like, consider subscribing. What do you think about this whole thing? Do you think red algae is a viable solution to methane emissions? If it's added to cattle feed, why or why not? Let's start a conversation down below. And please, if you're just gonna comment about factory farming, I'm going to respond with, thanks for the comment, and that's probably it, because I'm a snarky little bitch sometimes. So I'll see you all in the next one.